Welcome to another episode of the Chronic Comeback podcast. This week, I'm really happy and excited to have on the show Jo Foster. So just giving an introduction on Jo before we get into the podcast. So in 2014, Jo's life unravelled in the matter of a few weeks, becoming bedbound with overwhelming fatigue and a whole list of symptoms that I'm sure we'll get into. She was diagnosed with chronic fatigue syndrome and given a bleak diagnosis by her doctors, pretty much telling her that this was how life was going to be for the foreseeable. So given the option to just accept this and accept their advice, or to go down her own path and do her own research, thankfully, Jo opted for the latter. A long path of ups and downs, experimenting, led to the position where she's in today, where she is significantly improved, and is actually, the trajectory of her life has changed significantly in terms of she's now heavy into her qualification to become a nutritionist, and runs a blog and an Instagram called Heal and Bloom, which is just amazing in terms of the messages she's putting out there and helping other people. And it's the exact kind of story that I just love hearing and love having on the podcast, because, through her own journey, she wants to help people, who were in her position previously, and maybe they don't have to suffer for anywhere near as long as she did. So thank you so much for coming on. Really appreciate it. How are you doing?
I'm great, thank you. Yeah, that was such a good introduction. That sums me up perfectly.
Good. Well, I'm glad I didn't get any of it wrong. Cool. Well, let's go back to the beginning then. Like 2014. Weirdly, so 2014 was the year when it all kind of really got bad for me as well. So 2014 is an interesting, quite emotive year for me as well. So less about me, and if you could, talk us through it sounded like life was quite normal, healthy before then, and could you take us through that point until where you got the diagnosis?
Yeah, sure. So I was living completely normal, busy life of like mid-20s something. Just moved into a new house that I just bought with my partner. It was going to be a big renovation project. I just got promotion at work. I was like rowing for my city team, so like doing loads of training with that. Just out and about the weekends, like really busy socially, and then boom, like just couldn't move. Like I think it was about a week where I just thought I had like the flu or something, and it just deteriorated from that. And in a matter of weeks, I was just completely bedbound, just completely exhausted, and just kind of like feeling like I had a really, really awful hangover and awful flu at the same time, and that was just every single day. It's just awful, and also just couldn't sleep when that was the thing I needed the most. And I think that's the really cool part of chronic fatigue syndrome. It's just you just can't sleep when that's all you want to do. So it's just kind of all these things kicking off at once, and just felt awful, basically.
And so, out of interest, so I often hear this thing with chronic illness, but particularly chronic fatigue. I hear that there's normally, or there's sometimes like some kind of emotional event, but it doesn't sound like that was for you. It sounds like everything was normal and it completely took you by surprise. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. I never had kind of like a massive trigger that was emotional, but with hindsight, I was anxious for like most of my life that I can remember when I look back, but I didn't realize I was anxious at the time because I was just so used to feeling that way like constantly. So I think it's probably the accumulation of that was my stress trigger in terms of the emotional side of things. But it's taken a lot of time, like looking back on what happened, for me to even realize that was the case. At the time, I just thought I'd got a virus, and that was my trigger. And that's kind of what I thought for probably 6 months, 12 months. I was like, oh, I got a virus and I just didn't get better. And then it's when you unravel like all these other things that are going on beneath the surface, and the hindsight of learning more and more about how illness in the body works is kind of putting all the pieces together retrospectively, rather than at the time. It was just like, oh, I got a virus and then I got unwell and I just didn't get better.
It's kind of crazy, isn't it? How you, because it's like the same for me, really. When I look back at it and you kind of look under the hood, you realise that you were anxious, and like you would. I mean, I don't know if this is what you would say, but I would say for myself at that time, like, you know, I wasn't an anxious person, but when you actually look at it, I actually was. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, absolutely. Like, kind of very like perfectionist kind of personality, like high achiever type person. So I think on the outside, people used to think I was completely laid back and had everything under control, because I was like, but underneath the surface, it's just like all these things are going 100 miles an hour to try and keep putting out that image of being completely in control, like on top of everything, like, and naturally that causes such stress in the body, because running like that all the time.
I think it does tend to be this kind of achiever mentality that you're pushing yourself, and it's again same with me. Apologies to keep talking about myself, but it's relating it, and you're pushing yourself in every element of your life, and it sounds like you didn't just want to move into a new place. You wanted to get a place, and you wanted to renovate it as well, and you wanted to do all this big work. You've just had a promotion because you pushed yourself, and you've got a social life, and you know, I don't say you're pushing yourself in your social life, but you know that's also a big element of it as well. And I guess you're almost trying to achieve in every area of your life.
Absolutely, yeah, that was exactly me. And it's just, looking back, I don't know how I kept going for so long. I know I was only like 25 or something, but I definitely like had like complete collapse of everything, because every element of my life was just go. Like I don't think I ever finished a term of university without like having to be signed off sick, because I just, like, my doctor was always like, you're burning the candle at both ends, and that was just like my life summed up. Like every single thing was just go.
Yeah.
And I think the thing that actually tipped me over the edge was, so I was training for rowing, and that was, I used to run for 5k to get there, and then row for 3 hours, and then run home again like 3 times a week. And then I decided I was going to start training for a half marathon. So on my rest days, I was then basically training for that, and that was a few weeks prior to me getting sick. So I think actually that was the one thing that was like, those rest days suddenly became high energy days again, and it was just too much, you know. It's just nail in the coffin, really.
Yeah. Again, sorry, I'm just actually just realizing stuff about myself now. I was doing stuff at something similar just before in 2014. I was more of a vanity thing, but I was going on a holiday, so I had like 2 months leading up to it, and I was getting up for work at like 4:30, so I'd go to the gym before training, then go and working all day, and then I'd go for like a 5-mile run afterwards. And you're just pushing yourself in every single area of your life, and so with that, you started to become unwell. Could you talk us through the symptoms? Because you mentioned there was extreme fatigue. Was there any like body pain, or was there anything else other than that?
Yeah, it's like a list. I remember writing it all down once, and it was like bigger than an A4 page of paper. It was just like so many things were going wrong. But yeah, my main ones were fatigue, physical and mental. Cognitively, I was like really badly affected. I couldn't form sentences, I couldn't think, like it was just awful. Like I couldn't read, I lost like all my cognitive function basically. Fatigue, muscle pain, aches, like really swollen glands, like flu symptoms, headaches, really bad digestive problems. I think I lost, it was 10 kilograms in the first month or 2 of me being ill, because I literally couldn't eat anything. Every single time I ate anything, I just got these intense cramps and like diarrhea and stuff. It was just awful. I lived on vegetable soups for about 6 months because that was literally the only thing I could tolerate. What else? Basically every symptom you think of, I had it. It was just intense, really.
How long did it take from that initial onset to getting the diagnosis, and did you have to go and see a few different doctors, or?
So yeah, I saw one doctor when I first got ill, like a GP, NHS doctor, and he told me I was being ridiculous and that everyone gets ill sometimes and there's nothing wrong with you, basically. So for a few weeks after that, I was like, oh, I just kept taking the odd day off work and just kind of like pushed through it, like I'll get better. And then I realised something was quite seriously wrong. So then I switched GP practices and met a doctor there who just looked at me straight away and said, you've got chronic fatigue syndrome. So I was really lucky in that. Obviously his initial few weeks was a bit rubbish, I had to push through and stuff, but lots of people go for years without a diagnosis. So I was lucky. So yeah, that was 2 months in, she said that to me, and then I saw an NHS specialist. I think there was a few months after that. I was so severe that they fast tracked me to the local clinic, because for CFS to have a diagnosis you have to have had symptoms for 6 months. But I was considered that I definitely just had it. They did rule out with other tests and things, what was just to check there wasn't anything else underlying going on.
Yeah.
And then so started working with the specialist clinic. I think it was like January 2015. So it had been 5 months, something like that, before I saw someone. But yeah.
And what kind of messages were you getting from them in terms of how life was going to be from that point onwards when you got to the clinic? Because these guys are, I guess from your perspective, you've not really dealt with this before. You've probably never really heard of it before. And so you're now in front of a specialist. You're thinking this is going to be the person that's going to get me better in a matter of months. How were they?
I was told to lessen my expectations, basically. It wasn't, I had been told by my GP to expect to spend the rest of my life in bed, basically, and they had a slightly more positive message than that. But I think it was in the first or second meeting with them, they told me 7% of people with chronic fatigue syndrome managed to get back to work full time. And I was just like, can we not talk about that right now, thanks? So I do actually think they were really helpful with energy management. That's the one thing that they helped sort of set me off on the path of understanding that more. But they had no interest in the fact that I was doing things I was doing with diet and nutrition. They didn't see that had any benefit at all to your health, which is just crazy, really.
Out of interest, do you think that if they'd said to you, or maybe not, because you've ended up doing really well, but do you think if they said to you in that first meeting, because the GP, I guess they're not the specialist, right? So they're probably going to say stuff like that, even though that's quite a ridiculous thing to say to them. But if they say, look, we've dealt with a lot of people, and a large percentage of them recover, and I know they can't say that because but if they've given you a more positive message, do you think that could have sped things up for you?
I don't know. Me sat on that chair, it was just like, well, I'm going to be in that 7% that does get back to work. Like, that was just my approach straight away. So I think it didn't really matter what they said. That was just what was going to happen in my head. But for other people, yeah, absolutely. I can imagine that if someone who's sat in the chair who's a specialist is saying, limit your expectations, they might be like, okay, I've resigned to that fact then. So it's important to get the message out there.
I would like to think I would be like you in that situation and say I'm going to be in that 7%, but I think there would be a big part of me thinking, oh my God, I'm going to be in that, that 93. How did you? Were there times where you were thinking I am going to be in that 93%, or was it always I know this is going to work out for me?
Yeah, there were definitely times where I wasn't as confident in that, but I would say the majority of the time I have just always felt like sort of deep inside that it is going to get better and it's going to be okay. There's always been a underlying kind of sense that that's what's going to happen. But yeah, absolutely, there's been loads of wobbles along the way, and every crash, it's with everyone else, it's so common just to think that you're not going to get better because you just feel awful again, don't you? So it's and every time I've had a relapse, that's been the time when it's the most of a question whether I'm going to get better or not. I start to lose confidence in my health again. And if I have a bit of a wobble, then I'm like, well, is it going to happen? But after a few days, I'm kind of back on the track of it's going to be okay. I'm going to get there eventually.
Amazing. And so talk us through what was there. Did you stick with this clinic? What was the treatment? And how did things progress from there?
So alongside that, I was also seeing a private nutritionist at the same time. So that's kind of where most of my input came from. But with the NHS clinic, I was they have like in-person like group things where you have to group like things to go to. I was too ill to access that, and they didn't have a provision for someone who was too ill to be able to go to a group class to talk about ME. So I had to dip out of that one. But I did go to see them one-on-one. But again, that was a huge undertaking for me. Like, to go to a person, to an appointment with a person, it took weeks of planning, because the energy that it took and that the fallout after that was just intense. I had to move back to my parents, which was 2.5 hours away from the clinic. And so that's having to go up. I think I went every 2 months to see them, but to be in the car for 5 hours when you can't leave the house was just intense. And then to sit through an appointment, which was quite, emotionally draining most of the time. It was quite hard work, but it was worth it. They helped me, like with pacing, with like how to manage my energy. And once I was in a position to start increasing my activity levels, they sort of helped me put together a bit of a program for that. But yeah, so they were helpful in a way, but it was quite an undertaking to get there and access the support.
Yeah. And was it, so what helped you, at what point and how far down the process did you start to make some significant gains, and what was that through? Was that more the nutrition? Was it more the stuff of the NHS?
I think it was definitely stuff I was doing myself. So it was nutrition, and diet. So I saw a nutritionist. I only managed to see her twice with appointments, because again, I just couldn't get to see. I was too ill to go and see someone. I think now it's much more common to see people online, but for some reason at that time I didn't find anyone to do that. And it was just, my main focus in the early days was nutrition and diet, and working out what was triggering my gut symptoms, because they were like one of the most severe things that I was experiencing at that time. And then it was just learning how to rest, and I kind of went quite deep into meditation and things like that, just to calm down my nervous system. Basically, those were the 3 things I was doing. And then I think it took about 6 months, maybe 12 months, before I was like able to go outside, like leave the house, like routinely kind of thing, like not just a big event. It was like maybe I could go into the garden most days after about 12 months. So yeah.
And had you stopped work?
Yeah. So I was off work. My employer kept my job open to me for 5 years, which was really kind of them. And I did go back for about 18 months. In the middle of that, I got to a point where I started working from home for them again, and then had another big relapse and decided it was time to stop that side of life and just focus on my nutrition and qualification and just getting better myself. Really, health became 100% full-time job. So
yeah. And so could you talk us through the next, so you 12 months down, you're starting to be able to go outside, which I guess sounds like a small step to from the outside, but for you, I guess being inside for a year, that's got to have been like a huge step. Could you talk us through like the next year or two and the progression that was made then, and what helped?
Yeah, absolutely. I think actually one of the big parts of that was celebrating every tiny little thing. So like, we celebrated in my house when I could stand up long enough to brush my teeth, like things like that. If I slept through the night, it was like an exciting day the next day. It was just, so appreciating every tiny little improvement that you're making, I think, is key. So I moved back to the house that I bought with my partner after 18 months. I had moved back to my parents, and then I'd come back to the house. It was because it was a renovation project. It was just like living in a building site, and it just wasn't possible for me to be here. And we had some issues with mold and things, so we needed to sort that out before it came back. And then it was just really gradual. I did a pretty regimented approach in terms of improving exercise and cognitive function. So I literally used to time each day. I would do my walk and I would read a book, and those were and I slowly built up on that. And then I was just kind of like still experimenting with lots of different diets. By that point, I was probably on like a paleo diet sort of style. And then I moved more into like ketogenic diets. And I found those were like absolutely transformed my life, basically. I don't know if you know Dr. Terry Walls.
Yes.
Yeah. So I came across her, I think it was her TED talk and then her book, and that was like what largely shaped my diet and still does, actually. Because it was just transformative for me.
Is that similar? Because I've read her story, like recovered or completely reversed her MS symptoms through diet. Is that protocol very similar to like the autoimmune protocol?
It's sort of, yeah. It's so autoimmune protocol. You remove some other things like the higher lectins, so like nuts and seeds and nightshade family, fruits and vegetables and things. But it's a similar idea. So my diet consisted mainly of like high quality meat protein, eggs, fish, lots and lots of vegetables. Like on the Walls protocol, you eat like 9 cups of vegetables a day. So it's like quite a lot to get in, but it's all worth it. And then you're removing grains, legumes, sugars, gluten, obviously, dairy. So I thought that was really good for me, and that's just what suits my body perfectly. So I'm kind of still on that sort of same protocol. It's a little bit more relaxed now. I've done a lot of gut healing along the way.
Yeah. Do you have to stick to or get like all organic and grass fed, and or is that something you did have to do and you're maybe a bit more relaxed on that now? Or
yeah, I did mainly. I think it's always a challenge, isn't it, when you're ill, so you can't work, but then you've got to afford these amazing foods. So I've learned how to do it like quite frugally. So like local veg box. I found a farm nearby who work to organic standards but aren't certified organic, so it's not as expensive, and buying things in bulk and all this stuff. But yeah, I do tend to stick to organic now, and have done for quite a long time.
I know what you mean about expense. God, so that's what I'm doing at the moment. Just everything's organic, everything's grass fed, and it's it's expensive. But also, like going out to eat is just a bit of a tricky thing. I mean, do you allow yourself these days to go out and eat like non-organic and non-grass fed and stuff like that when you're out in a restaurant?
Yeah. So I actually became quite kind of like. Have you heard the term orthorexic?
So actually, the last podcast I did, they mentioned it. Yes, she mentioned it. But can you explain it again, please?
Yeah, of course. You kind of become obsessed with healthy foods to the point where it creates fear and you become really stressed about it. And I had got to the point where I was following a ketogenic diet and I literally couldn't eat anything that no one had prepared for me, because I needed to know to the number of carbohydrates in everything to check I was going to be okay with my limit for the day. And it just reached a point where I couldn't drink water from a tap because I was worried that it wasn't filtered. Like, it just became to the point where it was a stress in itself, which is obviously completely no point in being stressed about what you're eating, because it's going to cause stress in the body. So I stopped taking all my supplements. I stopped being so restrictive in my diet. I stopped researching everything like to do with health and just took some time off. And now I've got a much more kind of better relationship with what I'm eating. So I do now, actually, as part of my recovery from that, I will get a takeaway once a month, because I need to know that if I eat that, I'm not going to die. It's like it's getting that balance between things. I don't eat gluten, like even when I'm out and about, I won't have gluten, but everything else I'm all right with. Like I might have an alcoholic drink every now and again, or I'll have some dairy, and it's going to be okay. It's getting the balance between stuff.
Yeah, what's the 80-20 or the 90-10 kind of rule, isn't it? Like as long as as long as in that 10% or that 20%, you're not going and having a weekend long bender where you're eating pizza and you're drinking loads of alcohol. Then I think that's fine. And it's funny that, well, not funny, but you were talking about the anxiety before, and that's probably what caused it. And then you get into what's getting you healthy, and then you get anxious about that. It's kind of And then you get anxious about being anxious.
And it's the achiever like mindset. Like you have to be so careful that you don't slip into that with recovery. Like I know I did. It's like you can be researching for, you know, the whole day researching and seeing something and be like, oh, I need to try that. Like I'm not doing enough. Like you see it time and time again, like achiever types, just recovery becomes a thing you have to achieve at. And then that in itself is a stress. So I think having an awareness of that, what's going on in your head, is so important as well.
Yeah, definitely. So you're in terms of like the next few years, like, because obviously it sounds to me like the exercise was really important to you before. And I imagine if you're anything like me, you know, it's something that you were thinking about quite a lot and something you wanted to get back to doing. How was that over the next few years, and where are you at today, and what was the progression like with that?
So like walking was where I started. Did this really kind of like every single day I went for a walk, and it was always at my baseline. So even on my worst days, that's what I could manage. And then slowly improved from there. Like I increased by 5% every 2 weeks. If it's really complicated, but I had this like scoring system that I used to know whether I was okay each week, to whether or not to increase it or not. And it was usually about every 2 weeks I increased by about 5% every single day, went for a walk. And then once I got to about half an hour, I started working with heart rate as well. So increased the intensity of the walk, and tried to keep things at a steady heart rate. Because it's much better if you're working at an aerobic, with ME CFS, not tipping into the anaerobic category, because that's where you get ATP starts causing more lactic acid in the body, which can cause the fatigue and the pain. It was mainly walks for me, and then I did a lot of yoga as well as part of my recovery. That's been absolutely integral to me getting well, I think, kind of reconnecting with my body and understanding how it works and what it means and what the symptoms are saying to me. And then now I do a lot of like cold water swimming, wild swimming, which is great. And I have done running again. I've gone back to it, but I think it came from that place of wanting to like do another thing, and actually I don't really enjoy it that much, so I stopped doing it again. But it's nice to know I can if I want to. It's more gentle approach to exercise, I guess, and it's things that I do by myself and I'm not committed to doing it. I found like with team sports, like especially with rowing, if you didn't feel like going, if you didn't go, like the boat didn't go out because you needed a certain number of people to be able to do it. And in hindsight, that was a great pressure. Like if I needed a rest, like I went anyway because I had to. So I think that's made me realise that actually, like any team sport is probably not for me, like long term, and I just need to do things on my own terms, like forever. So
it's really interesting. You talk about like cold water swimming. It's something that, because I've done a lot of work, but I've tried to do work with like Wim Hof stuff, where breath work, and I've been on a few retreats. One was up in Scotland in December, which was we were like going in the locks up there, and interesting Sunday afternoon when you've got these families walking past you and you're there in a pair of shorts, like doing all these like crazy movements after you've just been in the lock. But it was amazing. But it's something I would like to do more regularly, in terms of like actually going and swimming in cold water. And I've thought about it recently. It's difficult in London because you don't want to jump in the Thames because you will get ill if you do that. And I think they've got like a Lido, which is like a freshwater swimming pool. So I've been thinking about doing that because I just miss exercise so much. Do you feel, because there's a lot of like research to show that it really has a positive impact on your mental frame of mind, but also I heard on the vagus nerve as well. Like, like how often do you do that? Can you just talk us through a little bit about that? Because I'm just interested in it.
Yeah, sure. So I only started it was August last year, with the intention of, if you want to start doing it over the winter, you really need to start kind of late summer so you get acclimatized to it as it changes, rather than just jumping in now where it's still quite cold. Excuse me. But yeah, it was for the mental health benefits, and it was for vagus nerve activation as well. And yeah, it's just like magic whenever I go in. It's just it's probably the greatest effect that I found for like just clearing your head and just setting you up for the day.
Wow.
Sorry.
That's all right.
I've yeah, so it's just, if you can face your fears and like get in first thing in the morning, it just makes you feel like you can tackle anything else that day, and it just sets you up, I think, for the most, yeah, it's just such amazing benefits, all round benefits.
Is it a lake that you go in, or is it the?
And so I just go in a river actually near my house.
Okay.
I'd never considered it before. Like I was so interested in the cold water swimming for, I think I saw like a Dr. Ranjan Chatterjee program, and it was, he was using it for depression with someone. And I was like, wow, this looks amazing. I want to do it. But I thought that I lived in the city and there wasn't anywhere for me to go really. My nearest seaside town has a marine lake, like Lido type setup. But that's kind of an hour and a half on the bus, or so I just assumed I couldn't do it. And then I started seeing people swimming in, it's just the Avon near me in Bristol. So it's not the cleanest of rivers, but no river in the UK is actually that clean really. So yeah, just started jumping in, and yeah, you get exactly the same thing. People walking past like, what's going on?
You're one of those crazy people now that like people are just like pointing out like, what is she doing? But I want to be one of those people. It's because you're doing something that people aren't prepared to do, and the results that you get from that are unbelievable. How often do you do it?
I try to do it like at least once a week. Through the winter, it's a bit dependent with the river. If it's been raining, or if it's been raining, like you shouldn't really swim in it, because like you can get sewage overflow and stuff like that, which is not very nice. So and it's a big river, so if there's been lots of rain, the flow is really fast, so it's not really safe to go in. But I think there was only 2 or 3 week period over the winter where it was too bad to swim in. So I've been going for like majority at least once a week all over the winter.
And are you doing proper like the equivalent, like do actual like proper like lengths, or most of the lengths? I don't know if you can do that, but like, or are you just going in there just for the cold exposure, or are you properly trying to swim?
I swim a bit because of the flow of the river. You have to swim, otherwise you get washed down. But sometimes it was like a treadmill, like you were literally swimming and you weren't moving. It was really funny because the flow was so fast coming towards you. But I was only in for maybe like 5 minutes when it was really cold, because you wouldn't want to stay in much longer than that really. So I was doing it mainly for the cold water benefits, and then hopefully in the summer I can get a little bit of exercise in too.
You've inspired me. I've been saying to my girlfriend, I'm gonna do it, and I was gonna do it the weekend, but it was like the timings. But I was using it as an excuse. So right, no excuses. You've inspired me. So let's just fast forward to today. Like, where are you at health wise? It still seems like you're like tweaking things here and there, and maybe you're not. No one's ever the finished article, right? We always want to be better, and particularly you with your achievement mentality. You want to be, the best, which I get. And is the target? Well, talk us through how you are now, and also is the target for you just like optimal health now? Like you want to be better than you were before?
Yeah, I was thinking about this the other day actually, because a friend asked me like, "Oh, are you recovered now?" I hadn't seen her for a while, and I was like, "Am I? I don't know. Like, what's the end point of recovery? I'm not sure." But I'm like, I don't have day-to-day symptoms that I would call chronic fatigue syndrome symptoms. I don't have to consider like whether I've got the energy to do something. I think so. I'm kind of pretty much there with that. I've still got the anxiety, which is funny because that's where it started, So I think these things take a bit longer to heal. I've still got some gut issues, but those are my 2 places where I've always known are my main places that I need to work on. I think I'm almost there. I'm just tweaking things. I've started working with another practitioner again. So we're just running some more functional tests at the moment to see what's going on. Had a bit of a dip like over the winter, so I just want to check like just had a bit of an MOT really to see what's going on under the surface. But yeah, I think I'm pretty much there. Yeah.
Cool. And so what did you do previously for a job, out of interest?
So I worked in local government as a town planner, of all things.
Okay.
Got nothing to do with it.
One of my best friends was going to be a town planner out of it, and then he didn't get the job, and then he went in a very different direction. So incredibly stressful, I imagine, with that amount of work. And then now you're how far into your qualification are you to be a nutritionist?
So I'm 3 years in, and I've got probably a couple of months left, and then I'm done, which is really exciting. Yeah.
So you'll be able to start working with clients, and are you specifically going to try and work with people with chronic health issues?
Yeah, absolutely. It's going to be complex chronic fatigue is exactly where I want to focus my attention, because every single practitioner I've worked with, like throughout my journey, I've hunted them out because they've recovered from chronic fatigue themselves. And I just find that such a hopeful, inspiring thing. So I'm kind of like, and just seeing that someone has actually recovered is just the best thing in the world. So I just kind of, I want to say I'm inspiring people, but you know what I mean? Like I want to be that person for someone else and like realize it's going to be okay and you can do it. So, so yeah, I just find it fascinating. Like there's so many parts of chronic fatigue syndrome, or so many causes and root causes, like putting it all together is such a challenge, but also when you crack it, it's just like the most amazing thing in the world. So yeah, that's where I'm going.
What you said then is so right. When you're staring across someone from over a desk, a doctor, and they've never been through anything like what you've been through, and there's almost a bit of a vacant look on their face as they're trying to understand. It's not their fault. They just haven't ever been through it. Right now, on my practitioner I'm dealing with, she's been through the exact same thing that I'm going through. Not exact same, but same ballpark. And it does just give you so much more confidence, like working with someone who's not only been through it, but has come out the other side and has a positive story to tell. So, I think it's so powerful. And I think if more people who went through things got trained to do that, not me, I would be absolutely terrible. But people like you are very meticulous, very, very interested in it, clearly, good researcher. I just think it would be so much more powerful for people. And I think if a lot of people who recovered went into that profession, there would be a lot more recoveries.
Yeah. No, that's so true. Absolutely. Completely agree.
So just going back quickly to like the mental side of things, could you talk us through, in those times, like how did you get through the times where it sounds like you had a great support network, which is with your family, which is amazing. And I love the fact that you're saying, you celebrate the small things. So I think it's so important. It's something I don't do enough of. And but yeah, how did the times where you had a big flare up or you had a massive setback, what did you say to yourself and what did you do in those times to help you get through?
I think I allowed myself to like wallow in it for a bit. I think that's really important, to not just try and put a positive spin on absolutely everything. But yeah, I think I always kept like a gratitude journal, and I think that was really important for me. It was every single day I had to write down 3 good things that had happened. So like even on the worst days, you're still throughout that day like thinking that, I could write that down later, or that was a nice little thing that happened. And like that was consistent for me. And also just journaling in general, like every night before I went to bed, I wrote down like whatever was in my head. And I think putting that on paper like really helps get things out of my head so I could sleep. Support network. I had like really supportive partner, parents, a few close friends that stuck around, a few that didn't. But it's just creating the environment for me that I felt supported in, and getting awareness of like how my thoughts in my head could be affecting my health. That was like a big turning point for me as well. And I wasn't necessarily trying to change those thoughts, it's just having awareness that they're there. And it was through mindfulness and meditation and things that I sort of developed the way to be able to take a step back from that and sort of move myself out of that situation and get a bit of perspective, I guess, on what was going on in my head and how it was affecting my health.
And so for someone listening to this now who's going through like a really tough time, perhaps is at one of the lowest points they've been at in their journey, and probably someone who listens to the podcast is doing it because they need some inspiration, they need some positivity, they need some advice. What is your advice to them from a mindset point of view?
I just think dream about those goals that you want to achieve, like when you're well enough. Like I had loads that were completely unattainable at the time, but I've probably ticked most of them off now, and it's like it was that visualization of I'm going to be able to do this. And yeah, I did use visualization a lot actually, imagining what life could be like and will be like when I'm better.
So I'm trying to do something. I've talked about it a number of times on the podcast and on my Instagram, like Joe Dispenza meditations, and a lot of that is picturing yourself, the visualization, but then also having the gratitude that it's already happened, and actually living in that kind of heightened emotion and trying to live your life on a daily basis grateful that it's already happened, which is incredibly difficult, of course, but if you can get to that point, then it draws you closer to I'm not going to go into the quantum field and all the stuff that he talks about with that, but it's fascinating when you actually go into the actual science behind it. I think visualization is so important. And when you actually hear about these really successful people in life, even when they don't mean to do it, they've always talked about this vision and this, everything they've had at the beginning. I think it's the same with chronic health. You have to have that vision, the thing that keeps you going. So I think that's such great advice. So I guess finally, what are the things in your life now that you feel like, or are there things in your life now that you feel like incredibly grateful for as a result of what you've been through? Like, your life, fork in the road could have gone one way, town planner, rower, house renovation could have carried, had you not got sick, would have gone off in that direction, but then it's gone off in this direction. What are the things now that you feel are better and will become better as well as a result?
Yeah, like so many things. Like I always say, I'm not actually grateful for being so unwell, but the things that I've learned from it have just like completely changed my life for the better. So there's so many, but learning how to rest, that was like absolute game changer for me and will be forever. And just kind of like tapping into like what's important in my life. Like when you're lying in bed and can't do anything, you suddenly realize like all that stuff that you thought was important just isn't at all, and it just really narrows your like vision down to what you want to achieve in life, I guess, and what's really important. And just absolutely, my life has completely changed. So like pretty much every single element of it is different. Like I feel like I know who I am as a person. Like the smoke screen of like all those things I was trying to pretend to be has just disappeared, and I'm kind of much more like my interests are like what I had as a child, like before the adult stuff came in, and it's like I'm back to swimming and reading and like all those nice things, and it's just really like that's who I was as a child, like my love of nature, all that stuff. And it's kind of like adulthood complicated all that, and now I'm kind of back living my true self and not really caring what anyone else thinks about that. So yeah.
And if you think about it, like you get people in their 50s, 60s, in their old age that are still trying to figure that stuff out, and probably because they didn't have anything like a chronic illness to slow them down and let them look introspectively. They just carried on down their career path, having kids, million miles an hour without something forcing them to stop and look at what they're doing. Like I wouldn't have ever been on a retreat in my life had I not gone through this, and I've probably been on about like 5 or 6 of them in like areas. I wouldn't have listened, I wouldn't have meditated, I wouldn't have done any of those things. And I think it's interesting that you're saying something different, but it's quite similar, just like it's forced you to stop and actually take stock of where you're at in your life.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think that's one of the things I used to say. I was lucky that that happened, because people do get to the end of their lives and they're like, God, what was that all being for? Like, it wasn't actually what I wanted to do, but I had that at 25, whatever. And yeah, even like going through something with a partner, like me and my boyfriend, we say kind of like we've got through this, like, and usually you don't get that until you're 50, 60s. And it's just, yeah, it's just been really useful in life to know what you actually want from it. So
And now you're on your path to do something very fulfilling, like actually helping people, whereas previously, that wasn't the path that you were headed down. I mean, maybe it was in some capacity, but not in the way where it actually means something deep down, I imagine.
absolutely, yeah. It's funny because when I was younger, most people want to be a vet or something like that. I used to say I wanted to be a counsellor, just because I had that such an urge to help people, but I got told by various people that I was too sensitive for that, and I would take on people's emotions. And actually, that's exactly what I wanted to do. And now it's kind of come full circle, and it's a similar role, but it's to do with food as well. So it's interesting. It's
Amazing.
yeah.
Thanks so much for coming on. If people want to connect with you, and I'm sure, hopefully in a few months' time, you'll actually be able to, take clients on. And so there might be some people who might be interested in having a chat with you in anticipation of that, or just in general, asking you a few questions. What's your contact details?
Probably through Instagram's the best. So it's at Heal and Bloom, all one word.
Yeah.
Or you can get me by email, which is joe@healandbloom.co.uk.
Awesome. I will include that all in the show notes along with your website. But yeah, thanks so much for sparing the time coming on. Really appreciate it. And yeah, I'm gonna go for a cold water swim now.
Amazing. Thanks so much. It's been great.